My neighbor reporting me to child services over and over just because my kids played in our own yard, ended up getting herself arrested for and harassment, then got kicked out in 7 days and watched our whole neighborhood celebrate her leaving. I bought this house 3 years ago for one reason: the backyard. After years of raising my kids in cramped apartments, I wanted them to finally have space. At the time, they were 6 and 8, full of energy and curiosity, and I used to dream about them running barefoot in grass instead of pacing around living rooms. When we moved in, that dream became real. Every afternoon, they'd come home from school, grab snacks, and head straight outside. They built forts out of sticks, had water balloon fights, and played tag with the neighborhood kids until I called them in for dinner. It felt like the childhood I always wanted for them. The house next door had been empty when we moved in, sitting quietly for months. Then Rora showed up. At first, she seemed normal enough. She introduced herself, brought over store-bought cookies, and talked about how much she appreciated a quiet neighborhood. She mentioned she worked from home doing medical billing and said she loved kids. That illusion lasted exactly 4 days. The first complaint came when my kids were playing freeze tag with a few neighborhood friends. It was 4 p.m. on a weekday. Rora came out and told them they were being too loud. My son apologized, and they tried to quiet down, but it didn't matter. The next day, it was sidewalk chalk on my own driveway. Apparently, the colors were ugly. Then it was their bikes on the lawn, then popsicles attracting bees. Every single day, there was something new. It escalated quickly. She started taking photos of my kids playing and sending them to the landlord, claiming they were damaging property. The landlord called me, confused, because the pictures were just kids playing basketball. Then she called the police, saying my children were unsupervised. An officer showed up while I was literally sitting on the porch watching them. He apologized and left. She called 3 more times that month before they stopped responding. Then she went further. She called CPS. The first visit shocked me. A caseworker showed up to investigate claims that I was neglecting my children by letting them play outside unsupervised. My daughter was riding her bike in our driveway. The caseworker took one look around: clean house, happy kids, safe environment, and closed the case immediately. But she warned me someone was repeatedly calling. 2 days later, CPS came again. This time the report claimed my kids were malnourished because they were eating lunch outside. Sandwiches. On our picnic table. The same caseworker showed up, clearly annoyed now. After the 3rd visit in 2 weeks, this time over my son using a jump rope too loudly, I was done. And it turned out, it wasn't just us. Rora had reported the neighbor's beagle across the street to animal control multiple times. She complained about an elderly couple's garden gnomes. She had an issue with everyone. What she didn't know was that our landlord, Sean, was actually my cousin. He owned several properties on the street. I'd never mentioned it because it never mattered until now. When I told him about the CPS calls, he was furious. But we needed more than frustration. We needed proof. So I leaned into it. I became the perfect, rule-following neighbor. Everything my kids did was completely within our rights, but just inconvenient enough to irritate her. When she tried working on her patio, my kids suddenly had recorder practice for school. When she hosted book club, we tested out a bubble machine in the yard. Completely harmless. Completely legal. Completely unbearable for her. She doubled down, calling CPS constantly, with increasingly ridiculous claims. The caseworker started documenting everything as harassment. Then came the HOA meeting. Rora showed up, even though she was just a renter, and presented an actual slideshow proposing quiet hours from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. for children. She wanted to ban kids from playing after school because, according to her, they were lowering property values. That's when everything shifted. One neighbor stood up, then another, and another. Suddenly, the room was full of people sharing their own experiences, documents, photos, emails. Stories identical to mine. Complaints about normal, everyday living. The HOA president documented everything. Then Sean stood up. As her landlord, he laid it all out. Over 40 complaints in 3 months, all unreasonable. The room went silent. Rora sat there, red-faced, refusing to speak. When she finally stormed out, people didn't cheer. They exhaled. Like we'd all been holding our breath for months. After the meeting, Sean pulled a few of us aside. With everything documented, he now had grounds to act. Her behavior violated her lease as a nuisance tenant. The next morning, he met with his attorney. The following day, I got a text. They had enough. Solid legal grounds. A 30-day notice to vacate was being drafted. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. A process server would deliver the notice, Sean had said, just to make sure everything was official and airtight. When he texted me that, I showed it to my coworker and she actually pulled me into a hug. She'd been listening to this nightmare for months, and I think we both finally felt like there was an end in sight. 2 days later, I was home making lunch when I saw a car pull up in front of Rora's place. A man in business clothes stepped out holding an envelope. Instinctively, I moved to the kitchen window where I could see better. Rora was out on her patio, working on her laptop like always. The man walked up, handed her the envelope, and said something I couldn't hear. She opened it right there. I watched her face change in real time, from confused to stunned to furious in about 5 seconds flat. She started yelling at the guy, her voice sharp and aggressive, but he didn't engage. He just turned around, got in his car, and drove off while she stood there shouting after him. That evening, I found a note taped to my front door. It was from Rora. It was messy, angry, and completely unhinged. She blamed me for everything, said I'd ruined her life, called me a bad mother, and insulted my kids. I didn't even feel upset reading it. At that point, it just felt like more evidence. I took photos of the note from every angle and immediately sent them to Sean and the CPS caseworker. The caseworker replied within the hour, confirming she was adding it to Rora's harassment file. If anything, the notice only made Rora worse. She called the police twice in 1 week claiming my kids were on her property, even though they were clearly in our yard both times. The same officers showed up, recognized me immediately, and looked completely drained. One of them warned her directly that filing false reports was illegal and that they would no longer respond to her calls unless there was a real emergency. She argued, of course, but they just left. She stood on her patio afterward, glaring at my house for what felt like forever. About a week into the 30-day notice, things escalated in a way I hadn't expected. I was in the kitchen making dinner while the kids were outside on the swing set. I had the window open so I could hear them. Then I heard screaming, loud, angry adult screaming. My stomach dropped. I ran to the back door and threw it open. Rora was in my backyard. She was standing right next to the swing set, yelling at my kids. My daughter was crying, and my son looked frozen, like he didn't know what to do. Rora was red in the face, pointing at them, shouting about noise and how she was going to make sure we got kicked out. Something in me snapped into focus. I pulled out my phone, hit the emergency call button, and started recording at the same time. My hands were shaking, but I kept the camera steady on her. I told my kids, firmly, to go inside. They had to walk past her to get to the door. She didn't move. My son grabbed his sister's hand and pulled her past while Rora stood there, arms crossed, watching them. The second she noticed I was recording, she turned it on me. She started yelling that I was harassing her, that I had no right to film her, that she was going to sue me. I told her she was trespassing on my property and that the police were on their way. She insisted she had every right to be there because she was enforcing neighborhood standards. I kept the camera on her and moved closer, making sure I captured everything, her face, her position in my yard, everything. When the 911 operator picked up, I calmly explained that my neighbor was trespassing in my backyard and refusing to leave, and that my children had been frightened and forced inside. Rora only got louder. She started yelling over me, claiming I was lying, that I was the problem, that everyone on the street was against her. I asked her one more time to leave. She said no. She literally planted her feet and crossed her arms, like she was daring me. 9 minutes later, the police arrived. The same officer as before walked into the backyard, took one look at both of us, and I could see recognition in his face. I explained what happened. Rora tried to interrupt, but he shut her down and told her to wait. Then he asked me if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. Rora lost it. She argued, claimed she had rights, said this was her neighborhood too. The officers told her she needed to leave immediately. She refused. Flat out said no to a direct police order. They warned her once more, and when she still refused, they moved in. The officer told her she was under arrest for trespassing and disturbing the peace. She looked genuinely shocked, like she couldn't comprehend consequences applying to her. When they tried to cuff her, she resisted, pulling away, yelling about conspiracies and abuse, claiming we were all against her. It didn't matter. They restrained her, got the cuffs on, and walked her to the front of the house. I followed, still recording. By then, neighbors were outside watching. Jake, the Fowlers, others peeking through windows. My kids were at the front window, my daughter still red-faced from crying. I waved to them, trying to reassure them. They put Rora in the back of the patrol car. She was still yelling as the door closed. Afterward, one of the officers stayed behind. We sat at my kitchen table while he took a full report. I told him everything from the first complaint to the CPS calls to the HOA meeting. I showed him the video, the note, all the documentation I'd been keeping. He went through it carefully, taking notes the entire time. When he finished, he looked at me and said it clearly, this was a pattern of harassment. He gave me a case number and told me the district attorney's office would likely be in touch. Later that night, Sean called. He'd already spoken to his lawyer. Because Rora had committed a crime on the property, they didn't have to wait out the 30-day notice anymore. They could move forward with immediate eviction. I asked how fast that meant. Sean paused, then said his lawyer was already drafting the paperwork that night. Sean told me they could legally force her out in 7 days instead of 30 because of the criminal activity, and I swear I felt something unclench in my chest for the first time in months. It was like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. He said his lawyer would have the paperwork ready by morning and that he'd serve it himself. He warned me Rora would lose it when she got it and told me not to engage at all, just call the police if she came near my property. I thanked him over and over, and he just said it was long overdue. The next morning, I was making breakfast when I saw Sean's truck pull up outside her house. It was around 9:30. I moved to the living room window to watch. He got out holding a manila envelope, walked up, knocked, and waited. Rora opened the door in her bathrobe, already looking annoyed. He handed her the envelope and said something calm. She opened it right there. I watched her face change in seconds, confused, then angry, then almost frantic. She started talking fast, pointing straight at my house like this was somehow my fault. Sean didn't react. He just stood there. Then she shook the papers and threw them on the ground. He calmly picked them up, took a picture, then took one of her. She shouted something else and slammed the door. He sat in his truck for a minute, probably documenting everything, then drove off. When I texted him, he said her reaction only made things easier legally. 2 days later, I got a call from the CPS caseworker. The moment she said my case was officially closed, I had to sit down. She told me everything was being documented as malicious harassment from a neighbor who had now been arrested. That note would stop future reports from being taken seriously. She even apologized. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. That night, I told my kids everything was okay. My son asked if they could play outside without worrying. I said yes. My daughter asked if Rora would come back. I told her no. The relief on their faces said everything. 7 days later, I woke up to a moving truck backing into Rora's driveway. It was barely 6:30 in the morning. I made coffee and watched as movers carried out boxes while Rora followed them, yelling instructions nonstop. Around 8, Sean showed up with his lawyer and watched from the street. Neighbors slowly came outside too, pretending to do things but clearly watching. I eventually sat on my porch with my coffee and didn't even try to hide it. By late morning, the truck was almost full. My kids came outside and asked what was happening. I told them Rora was moving away. My daughter asked if she'd ever come back. I said no, and this time I knew it was true. Around 3, the last boxes went in. Rora stood in her driveway, arms crossed, staring like she couldn't believe it. Sean walked over and held out his hand for the keys. She didn't hand them over. She threw them at him. He picked them up without a word. The lawyer had her sign something, and she did it without even looking. When the truck pulled away, Rora walked to her car. Before she got in, she turned and looked straight at me sitting on my porch. It wasn't subtle, just pure anger. I held her gaze. Then she got in and drove off. I watched until she disappeared. Sean came over after and said he was changing all the locks and installing cameras just in case. He didn't think she'd try anything, but he wanted everything covered. I thanked him again, and he just said that's what family is for. That evening, I opened the back door and watched my kids run outside like they'd been set free. My daughter grabbed her jump rope, my son grabbed his basketball, and they just started playing, laughing, shouting, being loud in the way kids are supposed to be. I sat on the porch and realized I wasn't bracing for anything anymore. No complaints. No tension. Jake came over with his beagle, and the dog ran wild with the kids, barking nonstop. Drake and Eva showed up with cookies to celebrate, and before long other neighbors drifted over too. The yard filled with kids again, laughing and running like nothing had ever happened. No one complained. No one called anyone. Over the next few weeks, everything went back to normal. Real normal. Kids playing after school, bikes in driveways, chalk on the pavement, popsicles melting in the sun. The neighborhood finally felt like a community again. A couple months later, a new family moved in next door. The mom came over with warm brownies and introduced herself, smiling, relaxed, completely normal. And just like that, everything felt right again. Now I sit on my porch watching my kids play tag with the neighbor's daughters while the beagle runs in circles trying to keep up. The sun's out, the street is full of laughter, and everything feels the way it's supposed to. Rora almost took that from us. She almost made me afraid to let my kids be kids in their own yard. But she didn't win. Because in the end, we didn't back down.